Hello, welcome. So, today's video is about, and for today, we're going to review a journal by Smirnova that is called Food for Thought. So, this journal, which is published in 2016, discusses about DNT, which is developmental neurotoxicity testing, the current progress and the issues that they are facing at the moment. So basically, this journal talks about the history behind DNT, who's the person that are victimized the most, and what are the improvement that they will be discussing about. So basically, the journal starts off with the definition of DNT. So DNT is basically developmental neurotoxicity testing, which is the study of the adverse effect, external factors, for example, chemicals and physical, that can cause harm on the developing nervous system during the developmental stages. So the journal talks about the chemicals that are present around us. So in 2006, it is released in a published paper that said there are around 60,000 chemicals in this world, in this universe, and only a handful of them are being studied regarding their adverse effects, and only 6 of them are confirmed to cause neurodevelopmental problems, and that's in 2006. And 8 years later, the same author, which is Landrigan and Grandjean, in 2014, add another 6 chemicals that causes the same problem. So can you imagine how long it takes, which is 8 years, just to confirm another 6 chemicals that cause neurodevelopmental problem? And so later on, it discusses about who are the most vulnerable to this sort of diseases. So who are the most susceptible to this kind of disease, to this kind of problem? So the answer would be those who are in developing stages. Those who are in developing stages comprises of those who are pre-birth, which is still unborn, and those who are still in their early stages of life, which is in children stages. So the reasons why they are the most vulnerable, there are 3 main points that needed to be focused on here. So firstly is the blood-brain barrier. So blood-brain barrier is basically a sort of shield in the brain that protects it from the absorption of exogenous substances that flows inside the blood. Exogenous substances, for example, are heavy metals or any toxicants that can cause disruptions on the brain development or brain processes. So basically, the brain barrier of fully developed once the individuals have reached 6 months old. Any exposure before that, can pass through the barrier just like that. Second reason why they are more susceptible than adults are because of their inability, the body's inability to detoxify exogenous substances. So unlike adults, developing individuals have their main organs, which is for detoxifying, is liver, not fully developed. So this leads to the possibility that the chemicals which is being ingested or inhaled or dermatologically absorbed can be detoxified and then later excreted via the excretory system. So in turn, the chemicals can freely roam inside the body via the blood vessel. And remember that I talked about the blood-brain barrier, right? In the blood vessel, that originate from the blood vessel. So imagine if the exogenous stuff is not detoxified, which is a very serious problem, whereby the exogenous can freely enter the brain, which will later on disrupt the nervous system development. So the final reason why they are more susceptible to this disease, to this sort of disorder, is because of the fixed time frame in which the nervous system are developing. So to give you a clear idea on the concept of time frame or in nervous system development, so imagine that you live in a group, in a functioning group. They are tasked to do an assignment. There are due dates, which is 7 days, for example, and each member of the groups are responsible to do their parts. So, for example, let's take me as the person who are responsible to do one job. If I am distracted, so for example, I got distracted with playing games or what and so on, this may lead to me being irresponsibly delay my part. As a result, the subsequent stages, which is the next part of our assignment, cannot be done. So as a result, the work can be overdue, or for if it's not overdue, then it will be in complete mess, because we do stuff at the last moment, right? So basically that's what happened to the nervous system, to the whole system, to be exact. So imagine if one of the neurons here inside the developing brain, are disrupted by the chemicals, so it has a high tendency to repair itself first rather than continue to develop. So in a fixed time frame, if the development isn't complete, then the effect will be permanent, not transient, unlike the others. Unlike a situation in which after the exposure is after the system is fully developed, in which it can be returned back to normal. I'm sorry. So that is why developing individuals are more susceptible to this kind of problem. So how serious is this problem actually? So I told you before that there are around thousands of chemicals which we use in our daily life. Imagine that only 12 of them are confirmed to be DNT, developmental neurotoxicity, towards developing individuals. Imagine the other thousands of chemicals that is still unknown to us regarding their effects. So this shows how serious this problem is. So plus there are increasing cases of neurodevelopmental disorders among population nowadays. For example, the ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, is on the rise at the moment, and it is rising at a concerning level. So welcome back, everyone. At a concerning speed. So for that, we'll be continuing on the next episode. So that's all from me for now. Bye. Same day, same shirt, but different episode this time. So we're going to discuss regarding the epidemic of the neurodevelopmental disorders. Basically, we're going to talk. Basically, this journal talks about the current diseases that are that are that are traumatizing the population at the moment. So basically, the kind of neurodevelopmental disorders that are prominent nowadays are learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, and also attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. So from this journal, it says that one out of 6 children in this world suffers from neurodevelopmental disorders. So imagine the numbers, this is generalized, which means the whole wide world, out of 1 out of 6 children suffer this disorder. And in USA alone, there are 1 in 110 individuals. 1 in 110 individuals are known to be affected by ASD, while around 14% of the 4 million children in this world, in US are known to be suffering from ADHD. So these numbers highlighted just how serious this problem is, because I talk about the seriousness of the problem. So we'll continue about it. This is correlation actually, this episode and this journal also. So basically, this shows just how the use of chemicals actually parallel the increased use of chemicals actually parallel to the rising cases of neurodevelopmental disorders. And it is believed that the number has doubled past decades, which has, as a result, it diminished the quality of the children's life. So imagine if you're supposed to be able to go to school every day, so understand it clearly during the classes what the teachers are teaching. But due to this kind of disorders, they suffer the inability to properly understand what the teachers are teaching. I'm sorry. ASD, for example, are known to be a major health problem among children, among population, because each individual that suffers from ASD are needed to be taken care of specially. So imagine the increasing number of children who suffers from ASD, the higher the capitals are needed in order to support their development, which means there are higher expenses are needed in order to take care of them. So due to these kind of chemicals, it will produce individuals that suffer from this kind of disorders. As a result, the government or the country itself needed to expand in order to give the victims a sustainable life. So in fact, instead of the government able to allocate the money for better aspects or better sectors, they are stuck with having to allocate tons of money just in order to take care, to give special treatment for these individuals. And Granjon and Rodrigan has recently made an very impressive analysis here, in which they stated how neurodevelopmental toxicant causes neurodevelopmental disorders For example, it lowers the IQ points in individuals. So imagine each IQ points are responsible in decreasing in increasing or decreasing the quality of life. So if any decrease on the IQ levels, the quality of life will be decreased, and as a result, more capitals are needed in order to sustain the individuals with lower IQ point. I'm sorry. And this just shows how the epidemic of the neurodevelopmental disorders and why it is a major problem, especially with ASD. So besides used for to sustain the individual's life, the affected individual's life, more capitals are also needed in order to do research regarding this problem. So the more the research, the more the money the government has to make an input on, and thus the higher the expenses are expected to be due to this problem. But let's say I talk about studies, right? So this is what the studies is what developmental neurotoxicity testing is, which is the study of the adverse effect. So basically, the testing are only observational epidemiological studies, which means that in the test subject, scientists or researchers expose them to some sort of targeted chemicals. They are suspects to this kind of diseases. However, this is a fact written here in the journal. There are limitations in the epidemiological studies. There are limitations in terms of cost, there are limitations in terms of studies, in time of studies, and there are limitations in terms of difficulties to interpret the data. So let's go back to the cost. So in this journal, it is written that for chemicals, just for single chemicals, it took about 1.4 million US dollars to execute studies about it. So imagine there are thousands of chemicals outside. How much money will it use in order to do studies about them? And the studies are basically based on a certain target, which means neurodevelopmental problem. It doesn't focus on other problem, for example the endocrine. So which if we study both problems, it will double up the money. So that shows how cost or money and capitals is a limitation to these studies. And secondly is time. I like to highlight what the Smirnova has written here in his writing, that he said that, or he or she said, I'm not sure, the author said that it took approximately 50 years before scientists can confirm that smoking can cause lung cancer. So imagine the everyday stuff we did. For example, smoking, which most people do almost every day. Only 50 years after that, it is confirmed that it can cause lung cancer. Means that how many individuals are out there currently have the risk of getting lung cancer. So this just shows how. So this resembles what are happening with neurodevelopmental studies. Actually, imagine the studies regarding DES, which is diphenylethyl. I'm not sure. which is basically hormone which is thought to be helpful in helping pregnant mothers to get a better offspring in terms of health or physical health or whatever. But the chemicals death is in fact causes this chemical death in fact causes such health problem. And one I remember the most is cervical or vagina cancer. So it took roughly about 40 to 50 years before scientists uncovered that death actually causes more health issues rather than the benefits. Plus, the benefits aren't actually being proven. It's just a short-term study being done. But due to the long term, that is what happened, which is the cervical cancer or vaginal cancer. That's what I remember the most. So that's regarding that. And how about other chemicals that we are being exposed every day? Because this is only exposed to pregnant mother, right? So how about the other chemicals that being exposed to us, either willingly or unwillingly? Let's imagine the effects. So that's in terms of time. So lastly is because of is due to the difficulties in interpretation of data. So in order for these studies to occur, there are needed for epidemiological evidence of the chemicals can actually cause the disorders. So for example, metal mercury are only being studied once there are two major incidents that causes developmental problem. For example, anorexia, which is complete loss of muscle movement, muscle control. It took two what can I say, disastrous tragedy, which is the Minamata, and the one that took place in Iraq, which metal mercury poisoning in the paddy field. So due to the two tragedy, scientists did an extensive research, and then they will later find out that metal mercury are responsible in causing neurodevelopmental disorder. So imagine how many studies are done in order to just to confirm regarding the one chemicals. This just shows how difficult it is to interpret the data, which is comprising of studies from multiple labs. So the studies will later combine and analyze and then later confirm. So this just shows the difficulties regarding developmental studies. So for the next part, which is there a need for the anti-studies? Like I said before, regarding the risk of us being exposed to the chemicals outside due to the thousands of chemicals, we are no doubt actually have such a high risk of being exposed and getting the risk of getting these disorders. However, I'm sorry. However, there are regulatories that are already being set up among the organization, the responsible organization out there. For example, in the US, there are USNR, which in charge of EPA, that helps in screening chemical products before being marketed outside. So USNRC, which is United States National Research Council, in 2000 has estimated that there are 25% of those who suffered from developmental disorders are due to environmental exposures. So this shows how us as a human being exposed to environmental exposure have such a high risk. For example, in these studies, it shows 25% have a high risk in getting pneumonia. There are 3% individuals that suffer developmental disorders via direct transmission. For example, direct inhalation of toxic substances, neurotoxic substances. So this just shows why there are need in the studies of DNT. Secondly, there are lots of gaps regarding developmental studies. For example, like I said before, which is the difficulties to interpret the data. So, due to the difficulties, there are many loopholes. For example, some studies expose a certain type of chemicals on rats, while the others expose certain types of chemicals on zebrafish, for example. These two data might be contradicted because zebrafish and rats are different in terms of percentage of disease, of gene expression of disease among them. For example, rats have roughly over 80% similarities of gene expression in terms of disease with human, while zebrafish has 70%. This means that there are probably different effects shown by zebrafish but not shown in rats. And to interpret the data, it will be difficult because scientists need to find out which part of the zebrafish which part of the affected system in zebrafish resembles that present in human. So the thorough studies are needed in order to properly understand the chemicals and its effect and its risk it has on humans. So thirdly, why there is a need in the studies. Sorry. So why there is a need for the studies. So D stands for developmental. Developmental refers to individuals that are in developing stages. So they are the next generations in our life actually. So they held the key in ensuring our species survival or thrival, I guess. So if they are affected by chemicals outside, which causes disruptions in their developing nervous system, the effects I already talked about before regarding the time frame. The effects will be permanent, and as a result, once they get older, they will not be functioning individuals toward the society. So that's why there is a need for the studies. So unlike adults, which if being exposed to this kind of chemicals, the effect can be seen as a transient effect, which is just a periodic effect. It won't last forever because firstly it's due to the developed blood-brain barrier, which prevent the exogenous stuff from getting in, and secondly is due to our body's ability to detoxify stuff. As a result, once we as adults accidentally ingested the toxic chemicals, we have a higher probability of excreting them out in a shorter period of time, without them having to affect to have permanent effect on us. So, for example, can be seen in acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, which are responsible which is responsible in controlling our muscle movement, for example, or signal transmission in our brain. So the inhibitor actually play a major role whether the event took place or not. So due to exposure to this chemical, some sort of chemicals, the inhibitor might be disrupted, and as a result, we become much more active because of the excessive release of acetylcholinesterase. But the effect is fully reversible because our body has a tendency to repair itself back to normal. It is not responsible. It is not focusing on developing. It can focus now because it is not focusing on developing because our body is fully developed. So in turns, it focuses on repairing the damage being done by the chemicals. So these 3 points just highlighted how highly the need is for DNT studies. Okay, so I've highlighted about DNT in this journal. I highlighted about the DNT, what is DNT, who is the most susceptible, and how it affects in terms of the individual itself and as a society as a whole. And I also covered about the need for DNT studies. So in the next episode, I will continue on discussing about current DNT testings and their limitations. So see you again. Bye. So hello, we're back on another episode of journal review. And for today, we're going to continue from where we left off, which is journal from Smirnova. And for today, we're going to view regarding the context of developmental neurotoxicity testings, which comprises of which comprises of the current issues and what are the problems surrounding it. Hi, Messi. Wanna join? So this is my cat, by the way, Messi. Okay. As for now, nowadays, the tests are being standardized, which means there are already a set of format being implied in, and everybody's that in charge of doing the testing must follow the guideline which has been given. So the guideline is suitable to any chemicals in order, and it is suitable to find different and specific endpoints, which means the test is very flexible. It depends on the chemicals itself. For example, like organophosphorus, which is ubiquitous in insecticide or herbicide, anything that's related to pesticide. Studies specifically regarding the endpoints of the chemicals. So this allows the tester being able to easily recognize the chemicals, whether it is potent or it is neurotoxicant or have any adverse effects towards human, which is the main target. Example of the test you can see is OECD, which is basically an organization that enforces or make up the tests that can be used for testers. For example, TG443, which is a test on chemicals that focuses on the endpoints for on the nervous system. Besides that, another organization that is responsible for this kind of test is REACH. Unlike OECD, REACH basically is a preventive measure instead of, how do we say it? Is a preventive measure instead of post releasing it to the market. As a result, it allows for a better and earlier identification of the chemicals itself. However, even though it can be seen as an advantage, due to the test being done before the release, it shows that how do you say? I'm sorry. The test being done on the chemicals, which is just on the surface, since it is not clear whether, or there are no clear evidence that shows the chemicals actually causes developmental neural disorder. Yes. So once done with the test, which is just fairly on the surface, then it allows once it passed the test, the chemicals itself pass the test, then it will surely be released to the market. So how are the tests being done for the REACH test? Basically, it requires all producers of the products itself to register the product regarding. So the registration should include in risk of assessment of the chemicals itself, ways of handling. So it not specifically test the chemicals itself. So as a result, it serves as a, what do you say, just a lenient preventive measure. So regarding the test itself, where it requires the producers to register, so there are two main things being shared in the journal, which is those chemicals that are high risk, which such as radioactive chemicals, requires authorization from REACH itself before being able to be used. And secondly is regarding the unmanageable products. Well, these products straight away by enforced by REACH or set up by REACH that it cannot be allowed in the market. So this is what I meant when I said about the preventive measure instead of actually doing the test on the chemicals itself. So that's about REACH. And back to OECD. Another kind of test being done is called TG426. So TG426 is actually a test being done on a test subjects during their prenatal or postnatal period. Doing this test allows researchers to study regarding the progress of the development after being exposed to the product itself. So, but however, this kind of test, the endpoints are limited to only the motor functions, physical development of the test subjects, and also regarding its neuropathology, which is any disorders or adverse effects on the nervous systems. So example of the neuropathology is cognitive disabilities or cognitive cognitive dysfunctions. HMC. So that's basically some of the insights regarding the tests that are available nowadays, as for now. And we're going to see the problems. What are the problems regarding the tests that are available that I mentioned earlier? So at the moment, the chemicals or the products being released are still not routinely being tested using the regulatory standard which I mentioned earlier. For example, the TG 426 and the REACH itself. But the REACH itself can be applicable because it's just a preventive measure instead of just test, instead of doing a test. And why? Why is it not routinely tested? Firstly, it's because of lack of clear evidence, like I said, that I mentioned earlier, regarding the evidence. For example, the tragedy of Minamata and the food poisoning of rice grain in Iraq causes the scientists all around the world to emphasize regarding doing a test on methyl mercury. So okay, let me tell you briefly about what happened in Minamata and in Iraq. So basically, methyl mercury leaches which are used in let's see, in pesticides, leaches into the water source, which then are taken up by aquatic marine animals. So the marine animals, this is for Minamata. So the marine animals which will later on being contaminated with the methyl mercury, and people actually consume the marine animals, for example fishes. So the adverse effect can be seen not on the consumer itself, but for the next generation. For example, when the pregnant mother consume the contaminated fish, the offspring will show the effect instead of the mother, and the effect are neuropathologic. For example, if I remember correctly, there are anorexia, which is total loss of control on the body muscle. This is related to the nervous system, the nervous system's inability to actually control the muscle movement. So this just shows, this evidence leads scientists to come up with the proposal to do the test. So due to thousands of chemicals being released nowadays, so scientists have to actually pinpoint exactly. Scientists need to be able to pinpoint exactly the chemicals that causes this kind of adverse effects, in order for the chemicals itself to be able to be tested. So if there is no clear evidence, there won't be any test. So for the second part, let me check the point. Sorry. Is the cost basically. So in vivo test, which is the most common or traditional way of doing DNT testing, is costly, and it concerns about the animal's welfare. For example, if you use rodents require about 1.4 million US dollar, as I mentioned from the previous episode regarding the budget needed in order to do just one test. So that's for the maintenance. And for the welfare itself, regarding the pain inflicted upon the animals, which raises awareness towards animal welfare animal welfare, how do we say, people who emphasize regarding animal welfare. Yeah. So this concerns scientists because they have to come up with an alternative on to replace in vivo tests or the animals itself to other animals or other medium which is lower cost and more humane. For example, from Giordano and Costa in 2012 mentioned about the use of non-mammal test subjects. So for the non-mammal test subjects, which is for instance they pick up about zebrafish, it's also applicable to do DNT even though they are not mammals. Why? Because of their fair share of genetic sequence, almost three quarter like similar to humans, and it shows almost similar adverse effects once being exposed to chemicals when being tested. So yeah, those are the problems being faced by scientists in order to do this kind of test. And another aspect or another problem that should be seen is the varied sensitivity, which means the endpoints. What we see or what we gather in the test might not actually be the same when it is exposed to humans. So because the test subjects actually is not 100% similar to human, for example in genetic sequence, like what I said about zebrafish, which is only 3/4. So this shows that some effects might be different in the animals, in the test subjects, and some effect might be seen different from what happened to human. So this is another problem that needed to be solved or needed emphasization in the neurotoxicity world. And yeah, those are the problems and the tests being done. So those are the problems and the current test which is available nowadays. So as for the consideration for that is what being discussed about. And we're moving on to another consideration, another point, should I say, which is regarding the problems. So due to the problems being faced for the anti-testings, there are realization among scientists to create a better way to do the test or finding an alternative to do the test. So they decide to do, how should I say, some sort of convention or some kind of workshop, should I say, some kind of workshop where in the workshop they will be discussing about the current test, discussing about the adverse output pathways, which is basically the endpoints of the test being done by them, and their focuses on new ways on how to find the end. For example, the endpoints are seen in specific biological process. I remember a journal from Leichhardt in 2018, which emphasizes on neurogenesis as a way to view brain disorders. For example, certain chemicals affect certain processes in neurogenesis. For example, lead. Yes. For example, lead. They are known to cause demyelination, which is a part of the neurogenesis. So demyelination actually causes the myelin sheath in neurons to be disassembled or disintegrate, thus causing slower signal transmission between the part in the axon. So as a result, it causes delay, especially towards developing individuals. It causes delay in terms of brain development regarding signal transmission. Thus leads to cognitive deficiencies such as learning disabilities, and also a problem with communication or hardship in body control. So those are the focuses being emphasized by scientists nowadays. So yeah, that's for the endpoints. So regarding the cost, which is another problem for DNT testings, so they turn to in vivo testing, and also using animals that are low maintenance compared to the traditional one. So yeah, that's some sort of the realization that are coming true among scientists nowadays regarding the anti-testings, and that probably sums up regarding what I want to say today. So for the next time, we will see regarding some of the ideas on how to improve the anti-testings. So as for now, I will take my leave. Bye bye. So we're back, and for today, sorry for the informal introduction. So welcome back to General Review, and as for today, we're going to talk about still smirnova, but regarding the things that we can improve in order to as a subsequent improvement for the anti-testings. So as I mentioned in my previous episode regarding the problems and regarding the issues scientists are having on the anti-testings, so the workshops that are being held or the conventions being held propose some things that can be improved. Firstly is the appropriate dosing. So dosing is basically the amount of concentration or the amount of the exposure that we expose to the test subjects. And there are aspects that are highlighted by the scientists. For example, if the dose exposure is too high, then it can cause some sort of erogenous endpoints or erogenous results, which is fairly irrelevant if we see what happened if we imply it on humans. And on the contrary, if the exposure is too low, it will cause the test power to be reduced, which in turn gives the scientists the endpoints or that they do not want, or perhaps there are no endpoints after all. And so they decided to set the exposure dose at maximal non-cytotoxic concentration. So by this way, they can ensure that the result will not go beyond comprehension or beyond logical sense, and there are still results from the test that they are doing. So the second thing that they suggest to improve on is the exposure timing. Why they emphasize on the timing is because the adverse effects shown vary and specifically influenced by the timing. For example, exposure of certain chemicals on specific gestational period give rise to effects that are different if it is exposed at different stages. An example I can take from is there's a chemical known as thalidomide, which has teratogenic effect that causes the offspring to have limb deformities if exposed at certain period, but at the subsequent period the effect is fairly invisible. There are no effect whatsoever. So that highlights the importance of timing. So besides timing, there is also the time of exposure, which is the time length, period length. Whereas the short time exposure usually being done in order to see the adverse effect, while for the long time exposure, we see the adverse effect and we see the adaptation being done by the test subject in order to fight against the effects. For example, how the chemicals or how the stuff being exposed are excreted out. So the third thing which is being discussed is time offset. Time offset is basically the time when the time period or the latency period whereby from the moment of exposure to the moment that the adverse effect is visibly shown. Example could be taken from smoking effect, which is it takes around 20 years just for scientists to realize and scientists to find out that smoking causes lung cancer. So this is another thing that is being emphasized on in order to improve the anti-testings, which is time offset. Especially we are being shocked by the fact that silent toxicity is happening around us. Silent toxicity is basically the adverse effect will be shown once the body could not mask the adverse effect anymore, the damage being done anymore. For example, our brain, which has the capability to mask the damage being done when, for example, a neuron there got damaged, and as a result other neurons come in to replace the role which is supposed to be taken by the damaged neurons. So it will be unmasked if it is exposed to certain type of exposure, either chemical or physical, and it can be unmasked if throughout period of time the body physiological processes is not normal anymore. So yes, the damage will be unmasked. So that's about time offset. So the fourth is regarding the cell heterogeneity. As we all know, in the anti-testing, it focuses on the brain, and the brain has lots of different types of cell. So how do scientists can ensure that the chemicals actually affect certain type of cell is by in vivo testing, whereby specific cell is is separated, which is separated and isolated, which means there are no interaction between other types of cell. So by this way, they expose the cell, a specific cell, and they can properly study the definite effect it can cause on the cells. And for the next part will be regarding the endpoints, regarding the adversity. So how can it actually be measured? Because too sensitive endpoints can actually leads to overestimation. For example, if we consider just a mild symptom of neurological disorder, then it will lead to on a test subject, and then we apply them to human, which is not necessarily same as what happened to the animals. It will lead to overestimation and over precautionary step, thus leading to us being overly protective, which is not good actually, which makes us actually it restricts our freedom actually. That's my opinion. And another thing regarding the adverse effect is another endpoints that are highlighted in this journal is regarding inflammation or immunological response effects of the exposure, because we all know in the nervous system itself there are cells that are responsible in providing the immune response. So the damage being done on the cell itself can actually leads to the damages being done on the neuron, because we all know autoimmunology, whereby the immune system itself attack the cells. So yes, this shows that immune response system should also be taken into consideration when we are studying about the adverse effect of the toxicant. So the next thing being discussed is actually gene interaction or environmental interaction with DNT. As you all know, there are some unexplainable cause of disorders. For example, in ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, studies being done by Landrigan found out that 30 to 40% of the 30 to 40% cause of factors of ASD is originated from genetic inheritance. So this shows how the genetic influence combined with the DNT can actually lead to such disorders. The DNT can be from environmental influence, for example, the air we breathe or the water we drink, the food we eat. So that can be the environmental influence combined with the genetic influence, thus leads to this kind of disorder. So that is another aspect that is being emphasized on regarding on how to improve DNT testing. So next is the need for inclusion of peripheral nervous system in DNT testing, due to the fact that I forgot a point actually. Oh yeah, regarding the gene interaction, going back to the 7th point regarding the gene interaction, it becomes more prominent nowadays due to the fact that scientists have the ability to extract pluripotent stem cells. So pluripotent stem cells are basically cells that can regenerate from adult cells. By having this ability, scientists can differentiate between the infected individuals. For example, the person who has ASD, and they can compare to individuals that are healthy based on the genetic sequences. So this shows how how gene expression is vital in order to study the endpoints for certain exposure of DNT in DNA testing. And the same applies to peripheral nervous system actually, since the advancements of technology that allow scientists to extract pluripotent stem cells, they can actually study the effect of DNT on the peripheral nervous system. So yes, that can be taken into consideration regarding how to improve DNT testing. And last but not least, another aspect that needed and emphasize on is the way to differentiate between species due to the variety of test subjects, especially in vivo. In vivo, it causes different. Assalamualaikum. Macam mana? Mana dulu? Due to the wide variety of animals being used as test subjects, it causes different endpoints or different effects it can have if compared to human. So how actually they can differentiate the effect on the species and relate to what happened to human is by using the marker gene. The marker gene that are available by extracting the neural precursor cell have the genetic sequence that allow scientists to differentiate between species. So there are some of the improvement proposed in this journal in order to improve the DNT studies. So as for now, we're going to end it here. Hope to see you again next time for the next episode of Journal Review.